mentioned, building a school, an old age home, contributing money, contributing fire truck to the city government, right? None of this ever came up. Scholarships for children, none of it. So my impression was what religion did was rituals and then indirect effects, right? So it really was a reservoir of social capital. It was very important if you're a local political elite to be involved, but they didn't do anything directly. Nor did they, this was a town that didn't have a lot of other religion, but it did have some Christians, some Presbyterians. In fact, a very old Presbyterian congregation in Taiwan was there. They weren't doing anything either, except for their own congregation, which was a very small number of people in that case. Buddhists, nothing. Taoists, even less than that, if it was possible. So that, for me, that's the baseline. Then, as I kept going back over the years, especially over the last 15 years, I would say, there starts to be a big change. And the most obvious, the biggest one, and I'll be brief now because I'll have to keep coming back to it, has been a new set of Buddhist movements that began in Taiwan and have actually spread throughout the world. The biggest one, and the first one to become really important, is called Compassion Relief, Tzu Chi. Compassion Relief was founded by a nun in the 1960s, but it only becomes important in the 1980s in Taiwan. And her thing was she was going to give medical aid to the needy. So the story is she went to a hospital, a local hospital. She was in a very poor city on the kind of backward corner of Taiwan. Went to a hospital and saw blood on the ground, asked what it was, and the story was it was an Aboriginal woman from the mountains who was in premature labor, went to the hospital, had no insurance, they wouldn't see her, sent her away, and the baby ends up still born. As a footnote, the doctor actually sued over this story, arguing that it wasn't true and he'd been maligned, and in fact, they settled, but he sort of won the case. But true or not, that's the story, that's one of the founding stories of this group. So they're really dedicated to medical aid. Not a traditional Buddhist thing at all, but extremely successful. So they end up with millions of members in Taiwan. And remember, Taiwan only has 22, 23 million people. So millions is a huge proportion of the population. And then they globalize. So there are branches all over the U.S. I don't know about West Lafayette, but I know in Chicago, and I wouldn't be surprised if Indianapolis also has branches of these, along with other big movements that do similar charitable activities. But that was just one thing. They also saw those local temples, very much like the ones I had done my first book on, doing things like donating fire trucks to the city government, or donating garbage trucks to the city government, building roads, offering scholarships for young students going to college, giving emergency aid to needy families. Something had changed, it seemed to me. That's Taiwan. On the mainland, it's not as strong. You can't have an organization like Compassion Relief on the mainland politically, and yet there are old age homes now run by Christians. There are old age homes run by Buddhists. And you can't do this officially under church auspices, but when you interview the people and they say, this is why we're doing it, it seems pretty clear. There are temples that build arboreta, for environmental preservation. There are temples that build museums. Now, we could argue, and in the question period, maybe we do want to argue about whether that's purely utilitarian. That is it a way of keeping the local government from shutting you down? But even if it is, it's significant. That is, even these kinds of utilitarian maneuvers that we make create a new structure. They make a commitment that we're stuck with later. Right, so it was this. That was my empirical puzzle. What happened between 1978 and 2008? What happened that suddenly made philanthropy, let me call it, an important goal of many forms of Chinese religion? So I started a project, a rather large project, that involves 4 field sites. 2 of them are in China. One is in the city of Changzhou in Jiangsu, so it's in a rather wealthy, sort of lower Yangtze Delta area, one of the ones that's doing really well under the new economy. The second one is Handan in Hebei, a more inland place or northern place, not a center of poverty really, but certainly not booming under the new economy either. So within the Chinese context, a very contrasting kind of a place. The third site was in Taiwan, a town, not the same town I'd been in before, but a town called Wugang, of about 20,000 in the town itself and 50,000 if you count the rural area around it. And then fourth, last, Malacca, a small town, a small city in Malaysia, but concentrating on the Chinese population. Malacca is one of the highest concentrations of Chinese in Malaysia. It's about 70% Chinese. So it was an interesting contrast. So that was the basic site, and it's collaborative. I can't do all that myself, so there are four of us, actually, one for each field site. Four of us work together on this. And three main research questions that we have set up at the beginning. First, what difference does denomination make? You know, in the spiritual capital literature, it seems to say all spiritual capital is good and it's all the same. It doesn't matter which kind. It doesn't matter if you have Baptist capital or Presbyterian capital, Catholic capital or Buddhist capital, right? It doesn't seem to make any difference. But that doesn't actually seem right when we think about it. So, you know, we do have studies. There was one I recently read of influence of Christian denomination on attitudes toward democracy in Taiwan. Now, there are not a lot of Christians in Taiwan, so we're talking about a small group, but still, the Baptists turned out to have very different attitudes from the Presbyterians. You know, just within that, they turned out to be different. So really, could it be that the Buddhists and the Baptists are fundamentally the same somehow? So this was just, you know, just the question, and there's surprisingly little been done with this kind of thing. But what difference does it make? What difference do Christian traditions of charity make compared to Buddhist traditions of charity as we see these developments? So that was one. The second one was scale. What difference does it make if you're a little organization or a big one? And they had a hypothesis there. It was that with little local organizations, you have thick social capital, and so you're really good at mobilizing the thick social capital. If you're a big national level organization, you can't do that. But on the other hand, you can do other kinds of things, like have much closer relationships to the state and mobilize state resources better. That was the hypothesis there. And we see that even within Christianity, right? Between the big kind of state-sanctioned Christian groups that we see, or in Taiwan, which doesn't have that attempt to control religion, but, you know, the Presbyterian church, some really big thing. Or, you know, in Christianity, you can have a church of one congregation, right? So it can be very local or it can be very big. So this cross-cuts the denomination question. The same is true of Buddhists. Temple religion really doesn't ever organize on a very large scale, so for that one it's mostly local. And the third question is the most obvious one from the research design, and that is, what difference does the form of the state